So this is kind of a mini stopping point before our next section. Was there any questions in the chat or anything we should address before we go on?
Michael Shin, you can go ahead.
All right. Maybe a sensitive topic, but on reparations. So maybe you can talk about that in more detail, because there's a distinction, right, between just blind reparations for all African Americans versus reparations according to need or impact, etc.
Yeah, I'd have to look up the exact text of the platform, but I believe it basically says something like, we're not prescribing anything up front here. This has to be a community-led process to determine what is the most fair and equitable answer, to make sure that we're dealing with all of the impacts of racism. It's going to be more than just writing a check to people or something like that. It's going to make sure that communities are self-sufficient and have access, or not just access, but as a right to healthcare and education and all these things that have been denied because of the racist system.
Yeah, and I also think that we have to think both in terms of direct reparations, which is that traditional check, but also in systemic reparations and reforms, right? For instance, Medicare for all would have more of an impact in the Black community than it would the white community, right? In a way, it's a form of reparations, because and not only the Black community, but minority and poor communities throughout this country's history have been, had greatly restricted access to healthcare. But when we start solving, looking at how do the wrongs that we're trying to right, how do they play out, then that's when we're going to be looking into, that's when we can start talking about systemic reforms. How do we deal with housing discrimination? Well, one way to start is a robust public housing program that that mixes incomes and really starts to address our the housing crisis in this country. And it's something we have to do, right? We just learned in the last few months, we've heard that Zillow is one of the major buyers of homes, so there's a corporate buyer. And then in recent months, we've heard that BlackRock, a major investment company, is the largest buyer of homes in this country, right? The homes are being sucked, and it makes sense, right? If you watch this, looking at the stock market and things, we're due a good crash. So companies like BlackRock are diversifying their portfolio, and they're grabbing up land, right? Because housing is continuing to rise, and it might be a little more stable than being in Twitter right now, right? Even though you just got a good payoff from Musk. So it's both, right? And we have to look at it as both. And during the campaign, how we always started with, we need to have, I think it was HB 40, I may be wrong on the number, but for decades there's been a reparations bill in Congress that starts off with, let's have a conversation and do some research into, what are the wrongs we're trying to address, and what are systemic and direct ways in which they can be addressed. And it's definitely, an over a long period of time type of thing. It's going to take a while to figure out how to properly do it. And it's not just, traditionally this is talked about in terms of slavery, but we absolutely certainly, owe reparations to Native Americans, and to, we paid them to the Japanese American population after internment in World War II. But indigenous populations, Hispanic populations, Asian populations, really we've done a pretty good job of oppressing almost every minority. So we live in a white supremacist culture, so it's not surprising. So we need to have these very hard conversations, and we need to find out ways to systemically address them. It's not just a check for the past. It's a promise for the future as well, that we have to make sure we're keeping and that we're addressing the flaws that we have. It's its own big conversation,
Yeah.
even within the party and even bigger outside the
All right. So, any other questions? I mean, we can hit questions at the end, but right. I'll go on and we'll come back to if there's more questions in the chat.